Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. He's a rabid Yankee fan. He's an amateur musician. He wrote a book about Korean Americans. He's a fervent softball coach. And he's simply the best host on talk radio in the United States today. He's Brian Lehrer. Who is this guy? Why does everybody love him? How does he get those great guests? Brian, it is an absolute pleasure having you here. You don't know how many times I want to dial 212-267-9692.
Am I making you angry? Am I making your blood boil?
No, not all the time. You just got me engaged no matter what it is. Time magazine, let me just quote some encomiums to Brian Lehrer, called your show New York City's most thoughtful and informative talk show. The Daily News called it the sane alternative in talk radio. John Podhoretz, in a nationally syndicated column on Thanksgiving, gives thanks to whom? Brian Lehrer, who is certainly the opposite side of the ideological fence from me, but every morning from 10 to 12, he puts on a sensational interview show with amazing range. I could go on and on. Zev Chaffetz, in an op-ed piece in the Daily News, admitted he coughed up $100 to at WNYC only because of you.
And you should all pledge to public radio.
That's
but
exactly right.
You're making this too easy.
Okay,
you
wait a
haven't
minute.
spoken to the people who hate me.
Well, wait a minute. I couldn't find any. What makes the show work in your mind? It clearly works. You clearly do a superb job. How does it work?
Thank you, first of all. We try to do two things, primarily. Not so complicated. We try to have deep analysis of the issues, New York City issues, regional issues, national and international issues, and we try to have an open forum where everybody is part of the community. So much of the media today is you're either on this side or you're on that side, and it's all about a villains list and an enemies list. I start with the assumption that most people, no matter what their politics, are coming to a serious discussion with serious intent. And so we try to open a big tent. Do I have my opinions? Yes. So when John Podhoretz says I tend to be on the other side of the ideological spectrum from him, yes, it's true. But do I also try to make conservatives or people more to the left of me comfortable? Yes,
sure.
Because that's a more important part of my job than my own opinions.
Okay. What is your job? How do you perceive your job? What is your role in life, Mr. Lehrer?
My role on the radio
Go ahead.
is that I work for a public radio station that has a public mission. We're not there to make money. We're there to fulfill a mission, to perform a public service, and that service is real talk on the issues. So that means going deeper and broader than other news or talk shows can go, because, you know, with the commercial constraints, they always have to think of it as the equivalent of top 40. Right? We have to play the hits. So as soon as the political campaign gets the least bit boring, it's back to the Lacey Peterson case.
Right, exactly.
You know, so, but we might go and look more deeply at what's happening in Darfur, or we might look at the cultural underpinnings of some of the cultures that were affected by the tsunami. All those things.
Who's the we? How does this happen? How does a show come about? Is it you contemplating somewhere, serenely reading books and listening to soft music? Or is it the gaggle of your staff and yourself trying to fit? What is it?
It's all of that. First of all, I have a great staff, senior producer Nuala McGovern.
Excellent.
And 3 associate producers who, you know, are as much responsible for anything that goes on the show as I am. And they're all funneling in ideas all the time. They're all funneling ideas of how to do radio, as well as topics and guests and interesting matches of guests and, you know, all that. Plus, yeah, I have my sort of serene time sitting on the subway or sitting on my couch and reading and just thinking, you know, walking to the water cooler from my desk.
Right. So this is all percolating. let's take the show that you did this morning. You had Newt Gingrich on. You had someone talking about the Condoleezza Rice hearings, and in fact, you had elements of the Rice hearings
Senate floor
there.
debate, right.
How did that show come about? Just that show. I mean, who picked the guest? How did you bounce off the ideas? How did it happen?
Well, that was an unusual one, but one of the things that the station is doing more in the last few years is live broadcasts of big national hearings or debates.
Or political conventions.
Well, we were live at both conventions
Right.
this summer, but that's sort of doing my show from there. We carried a lot of the 9/11 Commission public hearings live, right? We carried some of the Senate investigations into Abu Ghraib and intelligence failures, those kinds of things. Carried the hearings live because we think they're important. And again, as public radio, we don't have to worry about breaking for commercials every 7 minutes, and we can do something that's long form that is a service to those people who want to hear. So last week we had the Condoleezza Rice committee hearings
Right.
where she testified.
Right.
And then the Democrats forced this floor debate, 9 hours worth, right? Full Senate, anyone who wanted to participate. And the station decided they weren't going to take that whole thing, but since my show is news and issues and public affairs, I figured, well, we would dip into this because it was going to be pretty interesting to see where Ted Kennedy or Robert Byrd, who didn't get to question her because they're not on that
On the committee, right.
what they would have to say. Now, as it turned out, it started later than scheduled, so we didn't get to take much of it live.
And Newt Gingrich also came in late,
And-
which is one of the vagaries of
doing
live radio.
That's right. But also we had, by coincidence, we had Gingrich scheduled as part of his book tour
Right.
for this show. So we figured, okay, if we're doing Rice, we'll weave him into that. If not, we'll interview him on other stuff.
What do you have coming up? Talk to me.
Everything. Viewers of this show might be interested in our ongoing series called New York 51.
We would need to talk about that extensively. Let's segue to New York
Okay,
51
sure.
just for a moment. What is New York 51? Give us the web page, give us the web address because it's fascinating. And you got streaming audio. You can hear the old ones.
Yes, that's right. We have
Talk about
an
it.
archive. The webpage is wnyc.org, where you can hear streaming audio on our AM and FM stations, as well as our archived shows. We also have support information, as websites do, to go with the radio shows. New York 51, Life and Politics in Every Neighborhood is the name of the series in full. And we thought that in the mayoral election year, one of the ways that we could expand democracy is to get the point of view of the elected representative from all 51 city council districts in the city early in the year.
Right.
So our goal is to accomplish these 51 20-minute interviews between now and the end of June. And I'm not asking them about themselves. I'm not asking them about their personal politics. I'm not asking them about their accomplishments, which is hard when you're talking to a politician.
Yes, because they're so reticent about that.
But so far, they've been very good, all of them, on
Yeah.
staying on point on what I'm trying to get out of them, which is, what are the concerns of the people in your district? What are the demographics of your district? Of course, we live in a time of great immigration to the city. Who's coming? Who's going? What are their major concerns? What do they think of Mayor Bloomberg? What makes them contact your office? What's real estate prices? What are real estate prices doing to the quality of life, for good or for ill, in your district? What are the mayor and the chancellor's school reforms?
Housing
doing for
must be a
your
big
kids?
complaint as
Housing
well.
is huge. That's been the number one thing so far that the council members have brought up.
When we at Baruch did a orientation for new council members, we interviewed the previous council, and we were shocked at the degree to which council members' constituents are concerned about housing by far the most, and the schools. So you're hearing much the same thing, and in the interviews that I've heard, and what is interesting about those interviews, just like the 30 issues in 30 days interviews that you had during the general election campaign, you get a sense of these folks that you never get in anywhere else because they're not exposed anywhere else. You don't get to hear an Yvette Clarke or a Melinda Katz talk about their districts and the needs of their districts and the characteristics with as much feeling as they have.
Again, in the commercial media, city council members will only get on if they propose something sensational.
Or they get indicted or do something stupid.
That's right. I'll tell you, Peter Vallone Jr. from Astoria
Yes.
was on with me for New York 51, and he went from there to the Fox News Channel. Why did Fox News Channel invite him? Because he proposed that New York City secede from the rest of New York State. Okay, now, not that that's not an interesting thing to talk about, but it takes that level of, ear-catching, eye-catching, headline-grabbing ideas
Right.
to get you on a commercial station for the most part.
And you can, because of the luxury of where you are, afford to spend more time, but you're getting listeners. You're getting engaged listeners. It's not that that audience isn't there with reasonable talk by these folks.
It's very gratifying because we do get listeners, and it's always been my contention that to do serious talk about the news, you don't have to be boring. And to do interesting talk about the news, you don't have to be shallow. And so my personal mission has always been to combine being interesting and being important. Hopefully we're succeeding.
How much homework do you do? I mean, I know, having sat on both sides of this table, that you do we always do a lot of homework.
Right.
In the course of a day, for the 2 hours that you're on the radio,
Yes.
how much time do you spend doing homework?
Homework, I can say this on a CUNY channel, homework is my life.
Right.
Because, well, think about it. I'm on 2 hours a day, 10 a.m. to noon, right? And if you think about some of the other big commercial talk shows, Howard Stern, I think he's on 5 hours a day, 5 until 10. Mike and the Mad Dog on the sports talk station, 5.5.
We have to talk about the Yankees. Go ahead.
5.5 hours
I
a
know.
day, 1 to 6:30. Imus is on 4 hours, et cetera, et cetera. And so, again, I come back to public radio. And the structure of my day, the structure of the other hosts, my show is only 2 hours so that I can spend the majority of my workday
Thinking.
researching, thinking, pre-interviewing, going out, and coming back with informed, questions and some knowledge base, not just to bloviate.
But does it ever amaze yourself that you know as much as you do? I mean, I know as a listener that I say, how does this guy know all this stuff?
No, people say that, but the secret is radio, unlike television, is an open book test.
Right.
Right?
Oh.
I have my notes, and I do. I come in. You've been there with me.
Sure.
I come in with a stack of newspapers. I come in with the notes that either
You've
I've
got
made
this
or my
food, this
my
all
staff
kinds of
has
stuff.
made.
Right.
Yeah, I try to keep the food till
Right.
after the show. I have the water. I have the cough button. If I have to cough, it mutes my microphone. But I have all these notes. I have these reading materials. I have the web right there.
Right.
Right. I have a computer logged onto the wires and the internet, sitting right to my left. And I am sometimes doing live research right there. Nobody can see me. It's an open book test.
But that's one of the great things about radio is that, in a sense, TV, the camera gets in the way. It's very relaxing. Particularly, I've been on your set a number of times. You can communicate by hand. You can point to other guests.
That's right.
There's so much communication that can go on, and you've got all of that in
If
front
we
of you.
have a caller who's going on and on and on,
Right.
I can look at the producing arm.
Right. Right, and we've seen that happen. You've done TV in an earlier stage in your career. Would you like to do TV again?
Sure, I love doing both. I really like radio better, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Radio gives you more freedom in the ways we were just talking about, and also to just be focused on content. It's such a distraction to have to worry about the visuals, worry about if a talking head show is going to be
Right.
too interesting,
What
too
about-
dull, and but
Yeah.
having said that, I love doing television. I still do television. I go on New York One's
Right.
Friday Reporters Roundtable
right.
from time to time, and sure, I'll do more television. Give me an offer.
Okay, no, I've got one. I would love you to do 1 to 3 in the morning for your night owls. When you did the night owls for, I guess it was the convention.
No, it was a little after the convention. It was in the fall. Actually, it was October. It was
Okay.
it was the heat of the fall campaign.
Right.
Now, my show is repeated from 1 to 3 a.m.
Right, but it's a rebroadcast.
It's a re-airing.
Right.
You know, it's on tape from the morning before. But I know, and I used to do overnight newscasts on NBC Radio Network, and I know, I've been a night owl. There are people, some of the hardest working people in our fair city. They call it the city that never sleeps. Somebody has to service that city.
Yeah, and they did. I was amazed because then I started tuning in because I'm not a late person. My wife's the lunatic who listens to WNYC from the moment she wakes up to the moment she goes to sleep. But I found that audience to be a different audience than your daytime audience. Real blue collar, but very engaged and as sophisticated as your.
Right.
So
Well, I think
there's an
that's-
offer. Let's do.
Okay.
I want you to do
1 to 3 in the morning
1 to
every
3
night,
TV call
and then go to do live at 10 a.m. show.
sounds
Somewhere
good.
in there, take care of my kids. I don't think so.
Okay.
Make
okay.
me another
okay.
offer. Make me
okay.
another offer.
I tried. Your kids. What do they think of? Your kids are how old?
My kids are 7 next week and 12.
Okay. What do they think of their father as celebrity, whatever?
Oh, I thought you meant, what do they think of the greatest daddy in the world?
Well, no, that went without saying. No, I want to know their
I have
critical reaction to you as media viewers, or listeners, rather.
my, I actually try to bring my work home very, very little. And that means not a whole lot of imposing my politics on them, not a whole lot of trying to burden little kids with serious news issues of the day. But I certainly think it's important that they become engaged citizens. It's one of the most important things. So my 12-year-old has started to become interested on his own, so that when I sit there at night and watch the presidential debates or the State of the Union address or whatever it is, he has started to gravitate to sit with me. I think he'd rather be watching, Monk or something, which he favorite cult show these days. But he'll gravitate in there and watch the politicians and make comments.
Okay.
And that's cool. And my 7-year-old goes, "Daddy, are you famous?" Because he knows I'm on television
Sure.
sometimes and on the radio.
There is an element of celebrity to this as well. Certainly not the celebrity of some of your commercial TV counterparts, but there is celebrity there. People must stop you, particularly recognizing your voice, stop you publicly all the time. So there is an element of that.
It does. You can't, I can't walk down the street in New York City and assume that I'm anonymous.
Right, particularly if you're talking, because your voice
Right.
is so distinctive.
And it does happen to me sometimes, and I have driven into a gas station, said, "Fill her up," and the attendant says, "Brian Lehrer."
Nice, very nice.
That has happened.
I know, and in TV tends to do that as well because they visually see.
right.
And there's an intimacy both with radio and TV that you obviously don't get with print.
Well,
where people feel comfortable.
I used to say, now we have so many listeners, I can't even say this anymore, but I used to say that radio confers you the perfect amount of fame. Because without the visual, without being on television,
Right.
so people know your face, I can walk down the street and be anonymous. But if I want to pull it out and use it,
right.
it's there.
Exactly. Okay.
Your show is going to blow that whole anonymity for me.
This is fine. Let's get into some substance because you are very substantive, but we very rarely we get a sense of where you're coming from often. But what is interesting is the incisiveness of the question, no matter what side of the political fence. I mean, you are. It seems to be very careful with your bullshit detectors, and once they go into operation, you don't let people go. So you're tough without being obnoxious. And there's a toughness there that belies sort of the reputation. You don't let them go.
I think it's important to be tough if you're doing news interviews. I mean, one of the challenges for me is to walk this line between being somebody who has opinions, but not being somebody whose mission is to convince everybody else of my opinions.
Right.
Not that I don't hold a lot of my opinions strongly, which I do, but it means being very aware of the uncertainties in my own arguments, being aware of the fact that things are not are hardly ever black and white in this world, despite what some would have you believe. And so I'm going to go hard after people who tend to agree with me as I go hard after myself in my own ruminations about the issues.
So you're using this as a learning experience for yourself. You're
Totally.
trying out your own arguments against yourself.
Totally. Well, and you know, that's the best thing.
So you're learning. So
About, the best thing about doing a show like this is that I get to meet really interesting people, and I get to learn all the time, and get paid for it. Don't tell my boss.
Excuse me, but that's the same thing with a university professor or those of us who do periodic TV. Is the same thing. So you get your juice, if you will, out of the mental engagement of it all. It's not necessarily
Exactly
that
that.
you're winning a joust, but it's this mutual learning.
Right. I'm not in it. I'm with. If I have a provocative idea, if I have what I think is original thought, God forbid,
Well,
you know, I enjoy putting it out there
Right.
and stirring it up. But it actually, I shouldn't admit this, but it actually gives me some pleasure sometimes when people poke a hole in my argument that I hadn't thought of.
Of course.
Because it makes me go, aha.
But isn't that the best? Isn't that what you want to feel once? I mean, obviously you don't want to be doing too many ahas, but
Right.
that's one of the joys. What else gives you what else gives you juice in an interview? What is it about an interview that'll let you come off of it saying, "Wow"? Give me a wow interview. Give me an illustration.
It's the ideas, it's the people, it's the political moment. It's, you know, it could be it could be something that comes up spontaneously that I hadn't thought of. It could be a wow caller. You know, one of the great things.
Talked about that.
Okay, what my approach to calls is, I think, not your usual talk radio approach, where, you know, usually they're just asking for sort of anybody who has an opinion to call up and pontificate. Now, I think that's important to some degree because you have to have an open forum in a democracy. Right? We're trying to be a kind of public square. So it's open to everybody.
But you have a civic culture on your show.
But in addition to the open public square, we try to target different groups of people for different call-ins at different times. So I might have only Haitians, or I might have only taxi cab drivers, or I might have, you know, only Muslims, you know, or I might have only Orthodox Jews, whatever.
All the time you do it, yes.
You know, people with a certain opinion, or people with a certain
And people
charge.
listen for the most part. They really play the game straight.
And for the, you know, and what that does is target people who are particularly knowledgeable with personal experience about whatever the issue is at the moment, so that we can get, for the rest of the listeners, that kind of inside perspective.
So in terms of you, in a sense, you've integrated, what I'm understanding is your whole life is integrated with your work. And you're always working and you're always living your life at the same time, which is really quite nice.
Well, I actually try to draw a line when I go home so that my kids don't have a daddy who, you know, spends 6 o'clock watching the BBC and 7 o'clock watching
I wouldn't expect
the
that.
PBS
Right.
NewsHour.
No, I don't
you
mean
know.
that you're an obsessive compulsive, but you're constantly processing this stuff.
Yeah, right, sure.
Okay, let's talk about some issues. You know, as we said in an earlier life, you had done a documentary on new immigrants and written a book about Korean Americans. The recent set of data released by the City Planning Commission, Joe Salvo down there, premier demographer, shows dramatic changes in New York City's population. I mean, unprecedented. And we used to talk about the great waves between 1900 and 1910. This swamps that wave.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Does it statistically swamp that wave? I don't even know. But to me, because I followed immigration and segments with different immigrant groups are integral to the show, this didn't come as that much of a shock to me. I mean, okay, 6 in 10 babies being born in the city are being born to at least one parent who's an immigrant.
Right.
You know, I mean, this to me is incremental change, because I've known before that it was a little less than that.
Right.
And before that, just a little
This
less
is
than that.
tectonic rather than a real upheaval.
Yeah, I think 10 years ago, we already had 55% of the city's population were either immigrants or children of immigrants. So, you see this happening. If you travel around the city, as I know you do, you see the Mexican population.
Absolutely.
Mexican faces look different
Absolutely.
from Dominican or
Absolutely.
Puerto Rican faces.
Absolutely.
You can see that there are
Oh,
Mexican
sure.
Central Americans in New York City.
Oh, yeah.
In increasing
And we
numbers.
see it particularly in the high schools and then in our entering freshman classes. Us, the public schools and the jails, see the new immigrants first. So we see them in our classrooms. You could look at the demographic changes
right.
of the city, look at it in my classroom.
Right, and
But,
thank God for CUNY, really.
and are these new groups becoming part of your audience?
Of course, all the time. I mean, one of the I talked about reaching out to different groups for call-ins. When we have a type of segment that we call glocal, which is a combination of global and local. So when we talked about, what's a good example? When we talked about the tsunami, I asked people who were from affected countries originally to call in. And we got Indonesians and we got Sri Lankans and on and on and on, just to, with no problem. And one of the things that's really helped our station in the last couple of years, we now carry several hours a day, including right before me, BBC programming.
Right.
And, I know, because I talk to people from all over, and it's incredible what credibility, how's that for a choice of words? It's incredible what credibility the BBC has in Africa.
Absolutely.
In much of Asia. They actually don't get into the Caribbean or Latin America very much, but people come from all over the world to New York, and if they're bopping around the dial, they discover, BBC. And that also helps bring listeners to WNYC, and then we try to pay it off with our local programming that we kind of get it.
Brian, it's over. The whole
was
half
fast.
hour. It's fast. We didn't even get to talk about your mayoral picks and everything else. I think you have to come back, I would say. June-ish, I think you need a return visit because we have to get into your head. We'll talk politics. We'll take mayoral
I
politics.
said you should make me an offer, you did.
I will.
I'll come back.
Thank you.